Hello, and welcome to part 4 of our Breastfeeding Podcast. In this session, we finish off by talking about actually what does the law entitle you as a female colleague within the NHS. What rights do you have to ensure that you're able to fulfill your want and need to continue your breastfeeding journey despite being back at work? So Dr. Kirran Bilkhu brings in her expertise around the law and the rights, and we have alongside this, as mentioned in the initial introduction, allowed a repository of resources that's associated with this podcast to be hosted on our website. So for further information, please do have a look on the website, but please feel free also to get back in touch with us at the training hub. So we can support you in your journey with a bit more intensive one-to-one time. We hope you enjoyed the last part, and please do make sure you continue joining us for further ED&I topics of discussion in the Golden Thread podcast as we resume it for 2024. And without further ado, let's go to part 4.
So what does the law say on this? Well, the law legally is actually a little bit scanty. All the law says is it requires an employer to provide somewhere for a breastfeeding employee to rest, and this includes being able to lie down. And then there's another sort of part to this, just to say that employers should regularly review workplace risks. Now, obviously, we know that law is not black and white, and really, we have to look at sort of well-being, health and safety and welfare within the workplace. So the guidance, HSE guidance, this is health, safety and welfare guidance for employers, do require employers to provide suitable and sufficient facilities for workers who are pregnant or breastfeeding to rest. But the HSE further expands this to say that area of rest should include somewhere to lie down, be hygienic, so toilets, they specify, are not a suitable place for this. So the space has to be hygienic and private, so that an employee can express milk if they choose to. The employer should also include somewhere to store the milk, for example, a fridge. And employers should also consider providing paid time off to express milk or breastfeed. So essentially, it's a little bit more expansive than purely what the law says. So, and really, again, this is about being practical, and this is about trying to offer, a practical solution to this. None of that is difficult to offer within primary care. ACAS, which is so that this is usually what most employers would use as guidance, and they issue guidance on all sorts of sort of employee issues and guidelines. They also remind us that a breach of management of health and safety work regulations might actually be, in addition, be unlawful discrimination under the Equality Act. So this is actually, this is about equality and diversity, and also, well-being of our staff and individuals. ACAS really helpfully actually have a fantastic document on breastfeeding and returning to work. And the document is quite lengthy, but actually it uses quite a lot of examples of individuals returning to the workplace and looking at sort of personal sort of examples and stories within the workplace to demonstrate what is good practice and what is not so good a practice. So they acknowledge and they guide employers to say that breastfeeding, it can be sensitive and difficult to discuss with employers, and also it's important for employers to help this discussion to help with transition back to work. So, they acknowledge that it's not an easy conversation to have. They say it's good practice for employers to discuss with employees what can be done to facilitate breastfeeding at return. So essentially, that's a risk assessment. And they also do specify that a female employee might be more appropriate to have this discussion. So for your example, Errum, the young male, they may not be quite so understanding, or may not have thought of the practicalities because it's something that they won't have come across before. And actually, they also make the point that enabling employees to breastfeed at work will encourage loyalty, and the organisation will benefit from their skills. It will help to maintain well-being and the health of the employee. They also specify avoiding mastitis as well, which obviously is it is a physical physical issue, isn't it? It's good practice to have a policy and make it known to employees. So the very low percentage of 6 or 7% in the survey that had been aware of their policy, really, everybody should be aware of it. And also, employers have a responsibility to guard against inappropriate behaviour from other staff towards breastfeeding individuals. So actually, there is a responsibility for employers to maybe have a bit of discussion with the other staff members and make them aware that this is going to be happening, and that how to facilitate this and how really to empower the individual and make the process as easy as possible. I'm just going to finish by talking a little bit more about the initial survey, the BMJ survey on NHS staff and breastfeeding at work. There was a second part to the article, which is called How to Breastfeed at Work, also published in the BMJ, and that was last year as well. So, and this was an interview piece of 3 doctors. So 2 of the doctors were the initial ones that initiated the initial survey. And then there was another surgical trainee, actually, who also came in on the debate. And they sort of essentially put forward their experiences, but also a few top tips to help people when they are considering breastfeeding or expressing. So if this is something that you are thinking about doing, the recommendations are to know your rights. So ask your practice manager about the policy, make yourselves both aware of this, and if you don't have a policy, you can go to ACAS. ACAS has got some fantastic guidance on this, and certainly you can come to us at Return to Work if there's any queries or questions. We're always happy to support and signpost. Inform your employer in writing that you will be expressing milk on return to work, and request a risk assessment before you return. So essentially, that is just covering where you're going to feed, how you're going to do it, how much time do you need, where are you going to store the milk. So all the practicalities really should be covered in the risk assessment. Know what you're entitled to. So a clean, lockable room, a fridge for milk storage, and adequate time. So those really are the key things. And empower yourself. So just as Jen did, sort of thinking ahead, thinking about what she would need, come up with a workable plan that you can discuss with your practice manager. And that will allow you to move forwards and have a successful, positive experience with this.
That's brilliant. That's been really, really helpful. I think, especially that last summary of just, what individuals needs when they want to have this conversation with their practice managers, I think is really helpful, and it will allow, I think, people to feel a bit more prepared as to what they need to do. And I think also it was really interesting what you said about employers. I think sometimes we forget, don't we, that actually it's probably not that they don't want to do it, they haven't been approached about it before, or they don't know how, they didn't realise that this was an issue in the first place. And I think often as in primary care, because we are such small businesses and we're quite isolated and siloed, having a generic policy around this type of thing sometimes doesn't even occur to us because it happens so infrequently. But that's not to say that they don't want to facilitate. So I think one of the other things for any practice managers or admin that's listening to this podcast is to say, well, actually, we're more than happy to come and support you and direct you to the right places to find out. Because if you want to support your employees and allow them to breastfeed, improve their morale whilst they're breastfeeding at work, and get the most out of that employee, then we're more than happy to facilitate and kind of guide you to where you can get that info from.
And I think there's other bits that this can also impact on. I remember reading on a Facebook forum for doctors who are mums, someone talking about wanting to take a kit day, and they said that they were going to bring their child in. They were told that they couldn't for health and safety reasons. And I think that these are things that potentially need to be addressed, because if you are exclusively breastfeeding and you're going to do a kit day less than 6 months, so where you have an exclusively breastfed baby, you either can't do that because they're not going to be able to flex that, and if there isn't a reason, or they're going to make it possible so you can do that. These are not unreasonable things that you ask. I had the unfortunate experience of having to have an operation at 6 months, which potentially could have been a night in hospital. So I was still breastfeeding, exclusively breastfeeding at this point. And so for me, it was very important that I knew what the plan was about breastfeeding. These are not unreasonable things to be asking. So how my baby is going to eat while I'm needing to have this surgery. So this isn't just my problem, and it's definitely not my baby's problem. This is also your problem. So that was a hospital, and so there are some really good people to get. If they're in hospitals, so some of the people that will be looking at this will also be rotating through hospitals as well. So there are breastfeeding support experts there who could also have a little bit of welly in if you need welly. And obviously we've got people like Kirran who also can be approached there to get welly there. But actually, on the whole, the reason is it's just someone hasn't thought of it.
Absolutely.
It's just there. And sometimes I think that when people are ambushed with something they haven't thought of before, an initial reaction is no. There. And actually, if you give them a bit of time to prepare and think about this, they may actually come to a completely different way, which is, I think, the really important thing about preparing for it. And that's why I went in with the quiet conversations to start off with before, to allow them.
That's something that COVID has taught us as well, hasn't it? Well, actually, where there's a will, there's a way. We'll always find a way of making things work. It's just about making sure you have those conversations. And I think you mentioned about welly. I think it's that whole us and them. Sometimes when we're in quite a vulnerable place after we've had a baby, actually. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like, oh God, I'm going to have to really fight my corner here. And it doesn't have to be like that. And so it can just be a conversation, and it'll, and that's fine when your practice is saying, oh, well, we don't really know how we're going to do it. That's okay. But let's work out how we are going to do it, because it is going to happen. I think that's the bit that I think when obviously, Jen, you went back at 6 weeks, which I couldn't even, maybe just because I had twins, but I don't know how you did it. but
I didn't go back. That's the thing. I only went back in a small capacity, and it was in really bite-sized chunks there. And actually, I did intend on doing 1 4-hour clinic as well on top of what I did at that time, but COVID stopped that. So I didn't end up doing that because no one was doing as many face-to-face clinics, and as a locum, wasn't needed. And I was happy about that because I'd realised that it was a little bit more challenging. And actually, breastfeeding when it works, it is brutal.
Yeah.
when it's not going quite so well, it is insanely brutal. And psychologically, potentially not as physically, but it's about that sleep deprivation and the worry that you have over it. And so that transition from something that takes over, like 80% of your physical time, if you really, I was very unlucky. I had to express 7 times a day and feed about 7 times a day, breastfeed on top of that 7 times a day. So really, and day and night there. So actually most of my time, when it was the worst bit of time, which was actually about 6 to 8 weeks, it was That's why I was either breastfeeding or expressing in all those meetings, because I was just expressing or breastfeeding all the time, really. It is really difficult, and you don't need the anxiety of how am I going to be able to deal with someone kind of telling me I can't do this, and it's so hard that that I'm already up against it. It means that sometimes I think that we can, potentially, I think that's when people aren't supported enough that they can give up. So I want to be able that people, if they want to carry on, to be able to. Equally, maybe I would have been more sane to have given up at that point.
No, but then that was your choice, and that's exactly what it's about. It's about the fact that it is your choice. And I think the other thing that we stress has an impact on breastfeeding itself. So actually, the more stressed you are, sometimes you can have issues with supply, etc. And then it's just a whole different. I just remember those days where I was like, God, am I going to have enough milk for both of them? And it's exactly as you said. So I was breastfeeding one and pumping for the other, and it was just a really, really stressful time. I didn't know who I was at the end of it. But when you're, and so you need that conversation to go as smooth as possible. And I think that's why we're trying to make sure that actually, practice managers or practices out there that are hoping to, that are wanting to find out more information, please do get in touch, because we're happy to help facilitate those conversations and help you work out how you can make it work at your workplace. I think that this is the point sometimes where if you have someone who is really worried that they may have taken an extended period of time off, and even after just a few months you feel rusty, that you're worried about going back to work, you're worried, am I going to be able to feed my child, how am I going to balance all of these things? As an employer, what you want is that that member of staff to be able to come back and want to come back, and not come back and then actually leave. So it is so important. Retention is so key in primary care right now. And
that's what this is all about.
Yeah, this is a really small thing that practices can do to ensure that their workforce feels supported and they can retain that staff. Because, we know that in general practice, actually, the majority of staff are female. And so, yes, of varying ages. And so some may not be affected by these kinds of conversations. But actually, at some point, women will want to go on maternity leave. And I think that's, that breastfeeding journey post maternity leave is something that they, that admin need to consider, really. So yeah, I do. Just one, I guess, last point was that. So you mentioned about the 6 weeks. So my sister is actually a dentist in the US, and yes, she had her babies and was back at work within 6 weeks. And and that's just a whole different ballgame. I just don't know. I don't even think she considered breastfeeding. Which is really sad, because actually that decision shouldn't ever be taken away from you. I think that it should definitely be a mother's decision, whatever's right for her or for her baby. If they don't want to breastfeed because they don't, because of other reasons, fine. But that decision should never be taken out of their hands, made by someone else or other circumstances. But this has been, I've definitely learned a lot. It's been really good listening to your story, and I think all of us have been able to bring a little bit about our breast journey, into this. And it's because it's so, I think when we go through it, we don't realise that actually there's loads of people that are in our boots. Loads of people are going through the same journey. I think sometimes when you're breastfeeding and you're 6 weeks or even 6 months into it, you think, God, this is, I'm the only person in the world that has to fight this battle. And I hope that people realise that actually that's not the case. And actually, united voice is always better. And knowing that people are having these conversations, having these thoughts, and hopefully already implementing things within their practices, will make it a little bit easier for you when you want to go back.